You're listening to the Writers Homicide School, the podcast that brings writers behind the yellow crime scene tape. Each episode will peel back the forensic curtain with retired homicide detective Derek Pacifico. So whether you type Chapter 1 or call Action, grab your notebooks and sharpen your pencils. Class is in session. This is the Writers Homicide School.
Today, we're going to talk about some criminal law, some definitions. Let's talk about homicide. A lot of confusion in the words homicide and murder because a lot of people think they're synonymous. And while there are some great similarities, of course, they are not synonymous. Homicide, simply defined, is the killing of one human being by another. Okay? So if a person gets killed by a bear in the woods, that's not a homicide. It's a tragedy and it's a death, but it's not a homicide. Homicides can be on purpose. They can be accidental. If they're premeditated and done illegally, it's called murder. So let's talk about a couple different homicides and some different language. Let's give a scenario. How about this? Two coworkers, friends even, are working on a 3-story roof. And through an accident of positioning, one of them bumps the other one, clearly bumps him and knocks him off the roof, and he falls to his death. That is a homicide. But all the investigation clearly shows that it was an accident. That is an accidental homicide. It's not a murder, but it is a homicide. No different than if a legally licensed, traveling the safe speed limit, completely sober, good tax-paying, dog-petting citizen is driving down the street and someone, sadly, typically it's kids, runs out in front of that moving car and that person has no chance to stop in time and hits them. That's a homicide, even though, you're hit by a car, it's being driven by a human, so it's a vehicular homicide. Which vehicular homicide can take on different meanings in different states. So one of the things I do need to say also is that some of these definitions are going to change slightly from state to state. So if your story is specific to one, I don't even say region, but state to state, look it up and look for the right language and learn how to read it so that you know the difference. But generally speaking, homicide is the killing of one human being by another. Murder is a homicide with some intent and some malice of forethought. We've heard that. So there's also what's called excusable or justifiable. Those words kind of get interchanged, and depending on your state and depending on your jurisdiction, they might use them slightly differently. But an excusable or justifiable homicide would be a self-defense. So one example is that, and I worked a case like this, where an older man was living alone in his trailer in a trailer park. And he, for years and years, for all time really, kept this 38 loaded on a 2-tiered little end table next to his easy chair. And it was covered up by a magazine. And it just stayed there. It was his need, he kept it for protection. Well, one night he is sitting at home and he's watching TV. And like I said, he's elderly and he's not too quick on his feet at all. And some meth head who's mistaken either, we're kind of an assumption here because we don't get the end of the story, but either he thinks he's going into his home, which happens a lot, drunks and or drug addicts, people who are really high or drunk, sometimes mistake a stranger's home for their own, are all mad because their key doesn't work, think they've been locked out, or someone changed the locks on them and they start busting down the door and then wind up getting confronted by the homeowner. I've actually seen that a lot on patrol and later on as a detective in homicide. In this one particular case, the old man hears this guy banging on the door and yelling to come in. He clearly doesn't know who he is, and the guy doesn't belong there. So he calls 911, the old man, and says, hey, this is what's happening. There's a crazy guy out in front of my house. I think he's high on drugs or something. A fair assumption to make in the desert of Southern California. And this whole thing is recorded on 911. And he says, hey, listen, I've got a gun. And if he comes in, I can't really defend myself. I can't fight this kid off. I'm an old man. If he comes in and, I'm going to have to defend myself. And dispatch says, well, you can do what you got to do, but we've got deputies coming. And so patrol deputies are racing to the scene as fast as they can. But the youngster breaks in the door, and you can clearly hear this later on in the tape recording or the recording of the 911, that this guy comes in and attacks the old man, who is saying, stop, I've got a gun, just get out. If you come any closer, I'm going to shoot you. Stop, get away from me, and all kinds of very loud, get away from me kind of language. And the guy clearly doesn't, and I don't recall what he said to this day, but it was something unintelligible, basically, and comes at the old man. And on the recording, you hear, bang, bang, bang. And he says, hey, I had to shoot him. And, the deputies get there and see what's happening. And he turns over the gun and says, hey, this is what happened. And they all look at it. Now, it's still a homicide. And regardless of the fact whether the deputies on scene can see that it's pretty clearly justifiable, self-defense homicide, that's not their call. Homicide has to go out. And in fact, in the end, it's the district attorney's call. But we'll cover that, how that works in another talk. So we in Homicide, we get out there and we look at the scene. We've heard the story. We listen to the tape and oh yeah, this is pretty clear and cut. We're not going to arrest this old man for what clearly looks like, by all evidence, that this guy broke in and to an armed man's home who has the legal right to own a pistol and defend himself, and he did. That is clearly a justifiable, excusable homicide. It's how we wrote it up. We write the facts. I'll cut this a little bit. We write the facts. It is still listed as a homicide, and it goes off to the district attorney's office. They review the facts, and they actually render the judgment that this is a justifiable homicide. No charges should be brought against the homeowner who did the shooting, that it's a lawful homicide because he defended himself. So that's a really good example. And that's not anecdotal insofar as I heard that from a friend or knew a guy once. I actually worked that case. I worked several others. I'm trying to think if there were two. I'm kind of clearly remembering two shootings, but I don't remember one in particular without that detail, and I wasn't thinking about it before this episode. But I do remember one at a liquor store where the store clerk defended himself against an armed assailant who came in with a gun, and they kind of got a little bit of shootout, and the store clerk won. It's excusable homicide. Where it's not excusable, where it's not justifiable, is when we plan to do something wrong and now the acts are criminal in nature and we commit murder. Murder is the unlawful killing of one human being by another and requires some specific intent. But murder doesn't require specific intent to be that the homicide is the specific intent. If someone is committing a crime and a person dies during the midst of that crime, it can be considered a murder. Here's another case for you, another story. I worked this case as well. Youngster, drunk, crack addict, whatever, goes into a convenience store, stop and robs as we call them, and points his gun at the clerk. It's probably, I think, like 2 o'clock in the morning or something. It's one of these stores that's open 24/7. Goes in, points a gun at the old man behind the counter, says, give me the money from the cash register and give me some of that liquor and some of the cigarettes. In California, convenience stores can sell liquor, and they use the beer. The beer and wine is in the fridge out on the floor. but the Jack Daniels and everything else is behind the counter, as are the cigarettes. So the old man hands over the money from the till, which is usually like $30, um, some liquor, and a couple pack of cigarettes. The kid runs off, all caught on tape, of course. No shot was fired. No physical injury created by the youngster on the old man. But what did happen is that excitement, that fright of all that happening, caused that old man to have a heart attack and drop dead. When this went to the district attorney, I learned a legal clause called but for, BUTFOR, 2 words. But for this incident, that old man wouldn't have died. It is wholly irrelevant, and even if the autopsy could somehow prove that 30 minutes later the man was going to die anyway, is irrelevant to the fact that during the commission of an armed robbery, a felony, this man died as a result of that incident. That was a murder, even though he didn't have any intention to hurt and or kill the man. But the criminal did have the specific intent to commit armed robbery. Turns out the kid even had a fake gun. So shame on him for all that, because that caused that old man to have a heart attack and die. So there has to be some sort of crime, usually a felony, and in that, if someone dies, it is a murder. That's called the felony murder rule. And there's another part to that that's interesting, which is, well, here's a story. I'll explain it this way. 3 armed robbers go to the bank. One of them stays in the car as the getaway driver. The other 2 go inside the bank to commit the robbery. And they do the typical proverbial, this is a stick up, this is a bank robbery, and maybe shoot a hole in the ceiling and say, everybody get down on the ground. And in doing so, during this robbery, the security guard, who's armed, is maybe behind the counter somewhere and wasn't seen initially. He comes out, confronts one of the suspects. They get into a shootout. And the security guard shoots one of the armed robbers and kills him. The other one drops his gun and gives up. Guess what? The second guy in there gets murder. Not the security officer who's defending himself and those people around him, because he can justify the fact that he thinks these guys are going to kill him because they've shot into the ceiling. The next thing they're going to do is shoot a bank teller or a patron. The security guard shooting and killing the assailant doesn't get charged. The assailant obviously is dead. He doesn't get charged. But that second suspect gets charged with murder, with his friend's murder, even though he didn't even fire a shot. The other guy did, because during the commission of this felony robbery, this armed robbery, someone died as a result. And here's the bonus. The guy outside in the car, who never even got out of the car, never went inside the bank, he's still part of the robbery. He gets charged with murder as well. So it's a very interesting dynamic how that happens. Now, that might not be true in every state. So again, if you're going to go for accuracy and that needs to be an accurate point, and you're concerned about that, look it up in the laws and ask a local officer or attorney or somebody. But generally speaking, that is kind of the law of the land. When bad guys are committing a felony and someone dies, they're on the hook for the murder. Now, lastly about murder are the degrees. Now, the degrees get very interesting, and that there's really not a whole lot of black and white that can be said about first degree versus second degree. Because I think that's where the interesting part of where the jury comes into play, is they have to make that decision. But you've got manslaughter, voluntary manslaughter, involuntary manslaughter in some cases. Um, I don't know if any states have a third degree murder, and and I think they do, and some call third degree the manslaughter. So there's a lot of similar. Everyone's got to count the similarities, and basically it's the same across all 50 states, but the names get changed a little bit, and it's all in the jury instructions anyway. But first degree murder, generally speaking, is pretty ubiquitous in its meanings that it is a intentional killing of one human being by another with some malice aforethought. Malice being ill intent, aforethought meaning thinking about it ahead of time, having some sort of plan. But this is where the great debate goes in, and this is where hours can be spent, probably days in law school, talking about what malice aforethought is. I know it can, having witnessed it, it can be argued by both prosecuting attorneys and defense counsel for hours and hours and hours on both opening and then later on in closing arguments. And this becomes, maybe sometimes the crux of the entire case. What is malice? Then how much is aforethought? How much time is required to be thinking about a crime before it becomes thinking about doing the killing before it's first degree murder? Is that, days, hours, minutes, seconds, split second? Well, that's where arguments come into play. That's where the facts of the matter come into play to make that decision. Second degree murder is often a little easier to prove. It is the unlawful killing of one human being by another, and basically you just kind of have to show that that guy killed that guy and he meant to do it. It doesn't have to have any kind of malice aforethought. First degree is typically the only murder charge that will get a death penalty if that state has a death penalty. You can't get death penalty for second degree or anything lower. So it all plays into whether or not, what kind of charging it is and what kind of time they're going to get. Generally speaking, second degree murder is like 15 to life. First degree murder is 25 to life. First degree murder also has, like I said, the death penalty or LWOP, which is life without possibility of parole, whereas you can't get LWOP on second degree. So, and then there's all these other things. There's lots of stuff. If you're going to get deep in the weeds and you're going to make a story that's really living in the courtroom, then, we need to have a longer discussion privately and with some of my other counsel friends to really ferret out some of those details if you want to get there and have the twists and the turns. But here's a story that I would tell my students. Second degree murder. Let's say that a man comes home, or he leaves work early because he is not feeling well. He's got a headache and he just doesn't feel good. And so he's going home, and it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and he gets in the car, and rather than calling his wife to let her know he's coming home early, he makes a couple more business calls, and by the time he gets through making some calls and canceling some appointments and blah blah blah, he's in the driveway. So no big deal. He's going to go inside the house. Well, he goes inside the house, and lo and behold, as he's climbing the stairs to the master bedroom, he's hearing the sounds of lovemaking. And when he gets to the threshold of the door, there he sees his wife enthralled with another man. Having a gun down the hall, he goes and gets the shotgun, and which is just at the end of the hall in the gun case. He goes and he gets it, and he walks into the bedroom and he shoots and kills them both. Is that second degree? Is that voluntary manslaughter? Is that first degree murder? Well, I haven't given you really a good definition of voluntary manslaughter, so we'll come back to that, and I'll say easily it's at least a second degree murder, right? Okay, we pretty much can get there. Now, is it first degree? Is there malice? Is there malice aforethought? Is there a caveat for crime of passion, which is one of the things that says that a crime cannot be a first degree if there's a crime of passion? And crime of passion in the heated moment, I would say that this was a passionate moment for the man to come in and see all this happening. Passion doesn't always mean love, it means high emotion. So, could it be argued that when the man saw what he saw in progress, could he have not gone and gotten the gun? Yeah. So he decided to go get the gun. Did he think about that ahead of time? I'm going to go get this gun and I'm going to kill them for cheating on me in this. Is there malice there? Well, you could say yes. You could think you could argue. I'm going to kill these people. That's the thought that formulated in his brain. And then he took the time and decided to turn his body and walk away from the open room and walk down the hall every single step it took to get to the gun safe at the end of the hall. Then he took the time and continued to deliberate while he turned or punched in the codes, however you want to imagine this gun safe. And he took the time to do all that, then open it, spin the knob, pull the door open. He's still thinking all this time. And reach in, select which weapon he wants, probably load it. If not load it, at least rack it and make it ready. All of that all of that time, all of those things, all of those steps, physically and literally, are considerations. They're deliberations. They are planning. Then he turns and decidedly walks back down the hall to that bedroom door where they're still, enthralled in their lovemaking and don't know that he's come home and don't hear all this. Then either there or earlier, he's racked the gun. He takes aim with the weapon and decides to pull the trigger, not once, but twice. Let's say he only shoots one here and one there. Where, can that be argued that that's malice aforethought, or is that a crime of passion? Is there a defense for that? Is that only second degree? Can we prove first degree? Can we call that malice aforethought? We know that he didn't come home to kill them. Let's not go down that road. That was a legit story. He was just feeling sick, had no idea that his wife was cheating on him with this other man, whoever he is. Insert your story here. That was a total surprise. So, but is there enough time for malice aforethought to go down the hall, open the safe, get the gun, and come back? I'll leave that up to you. That's the jury's argument in the deliberation room, because that's probably going to be an argument made. The defense will say it's crime of passion, that this was a state of excited confusion and that he did not have malice aforethought, that he didn't know what he was doing and all this. And it's going to be up to you to decide in the jury room, or in this case, at the writer's keyboard, as to how this whole thing turns out. So I'll step back briefly into manslaughter. Manslaughter is sort of a generic killing. There are, of course, legal definitions for all these, and you can look them up easily in your state. Look up your state statute, look up criminal code, take it to wherever those are being stored. It's various different databases throughout the different states. I would caution you this, though. Don't go to a lawyer's site, because typically it's going to be slanted towards the defense notions and it's going to leave out other language. Go to some LexisNexis, government, some .gov or .edu that might be storing the information, so you can actually read the statute yourself and make your own determination and read through these words and go, oh, okay, I see what this means. But voluntary manslaughter or involuntary manslaughter, a lot of times where I saw that charged is stuff like, here's another story, because I got a bunch of them. Young Marine, I think it was Marine, young military man, minding his own business, on leave at home in a bar. Fat old guy with an attitude, drunk off his ass, starts talking trash to this military guy who don't know each other and they have no prior beef. Starts talking his smack and wants to fight this guy, and the Marine or the young military guy says, I'm done. I'm out of here. I'm just going to leave. So he goes to leave, but the stupid fat old guy decides to follow him out there and pick a fight with him. finally, the young military guy, after taking a couple swings and misses, throws one punch, hits the guy in the chin, knocks him out. The guy falls like a cut tree, slams his head on a parking curb, and shortly thereafter dies from a subdural hematoma and swelling in the brain. And did the Marine act in self-defense? Or I keep saying Marine, but I don't recall if he was a Marine. I don't mean to disparage any military at all. Proud supporter of the United States Armed Forces. The notion was self-defense, because was he going to lose a fight from this drunk old guy? You can argue and say, well, did he have to hit the guy? My opinion, some guy's going to get hit, to be honest with you. That guy needed to be hit. Everybody in the bar said the guy was a jerk, chasing this guy down out of the parking lot, wouldn't leave him alone. This military kid had no intention of killing this guy. Did he have every intention of smacking him in the teeth? Yeah. Did the guy deserve it? Yeah. Did he deserve to die? No. And, but he chose his battle. That was looked at as a homicide, because it was one killing of a human being by another. And then it was looked at as a low-grade manslaughter. And based on the circumstances, I think he did a very little bit of time in jail, basically pending a court trial, which never went to trial. And it was pled out to, some probation and things of that nature. I don't recall the exact, but it was not a long time, because it wasn't a murder and he wasn't with any malice and all of those things. So there's a variety of different ways you can come at the death of one human being by another and have lots of different levels of criminality involved there. When you're writing your scenes, when you're writing your stories, you can have fun with this aspect of confusing your audience with maybe people who are reporting it wrong. You can use the exposition of explanation while the detective teaches the rookie, so you can talk to your audience, educate your audience if you need to, have the judge do it to the jury, wherever you want. But here, think about make sure you use the words correctly. And I think that's the bottom line that I want to bring to you today on the murder cases. I'm going to talk to you about burglary and robberies and homicides and some other things, burglary, robberies, and some other assaults and things in another episode. But if you want your stories to be authentic, look up the definitions, make sure you get them correctly, think it through. And if you have any questions, always feel free to contact me and we can do a private consultation and we can get you through some of those scenes and scenarios. But until then, keep writing.